Good morning. It's John Fontaine from Maximus Heart, and I am absolutely beyond pleased this morning to be here for the very first Maximus Heart Stories from the Wellspring of Life video podcast. And I could not have chosen a better guest to launch this inaugural venture than my friend George Stoimenov from the United Kingdom. Now, I'm going to give George a little bio brief here before we begin talking. George is the founder and main editor of Men's Corner, and we'll put that link up on the screen, but you can find it at menscorner.co.uk. He was born and bred in Bulgaria, and George has lived in Britain since 2009. He's a men's coach and a public speaker who delivers talks on various subjects related to masculinity and being a man. George not only runs a life coaching business that's exclusively designed to empower men and support them in stepping into their confidence and the realization of their full potential, but he has worked with men in the United Kingdom, South Africa, Zambia, his native Bulgaria, as well as the United States. And I am absolutely pleased to say I have been one of them. George and his family, his wife and children, they live in Eastbourne, East Sussex. And if you want to learn more about George and his work, you can go to his other website, www.trainingformen.co.uk. Most recently, George has written a book and is the author of The Father Wound: Discovering, Addressing, and Overcoming the Hidden Phenomenon That Shapes Every Man's Life. And that is available both on Amazon in the UK and in the United States. So it is my pleasure, dear friend, to welcome you to the Maximus Heart video podcast this morning. How are you?
Thanks, brother. Wow, what an introduction. Hope I live up to it.
You will, you do. So
Go down here for now.
yeah.
Oh, wow. It's so great to finally make this happen. It's so great. It's been, long time in the making. So I'm very, very happy to be here sitting, watching you across the pond.
Good.
Thank you.
So let's start, George, this morning by just talk to us, and we're going to have this in video format. George is going to link it to his websites, possibly his YouTube channel. I'll have it available once it's ready to go, both video and audio. Talk to us about the book. I'm fascinated by this. We share a passion and a love for writing behind the scenes, and we're both writers in progress, as I call. So, but talk to me about this particular book, The Father Wound. Give listeners a little bit of history about how this came about and what prompted you to put it out right here, right now.
Well, it's been in the making for years. In fact, this book is actually what was supposed to be a first chapter of a bigger book for men, which I started writing a long time ago. But only recently I realized that while the years are going by, I don't know how long it would take me to publish this longer book. So I decided to just do it chapter by chapter. And the first chapter is The Father Wound, for a good reason, as you know very well. Because over a decade ago, when I started on my inner journey, feeling that something inside is broken, something doesn't work right, I can't be the man that I want to be. In fact, I'm the opposite. I can't engage life. I can't pursue the things that mature men are able to pursue. And so the first thing that came up and that I stayed with, and I'm still working on actually, in fact, but that was really transformative in my life, is facing, addressing, and then in time, gradually overcoming my father wound. I didn't know I had a father wound, obviously. I had no idea. And that's in the book. I put that in the book. It's not something obvious. And most men, all men, are shaped, really seriously shaped by the relationship or the lack of relationship with their earthly father.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because what I just heard you say is that it was a discovery for you to realize that the father wound existed in your story. Now, and any of our listeners or followers on either side of the pond probably are familiar with your content, my content. No, we're allies with John Eldredge and his one of his fascinating books called Fathered by God. talked about that in his book Wild at Heart as well, about that father wound. So where is there a specific example with your own father that while you were writing this, that you kind of connected the dots maybe between books you read by Eldridge, books you read? I know Gordon Dalby's another favorite author of yours on the subject of fathering and the father wound, as well as me. And so what pieces of your own father's story got connected by the dots of this while you were writing the father wound?
Yeah, well, let me try and I'm going to answer this question. Like, I'm going to give you a broader answer first, and then I'm going to get
Sure.
to name some examples. The
Sure.
broader answer was that a friend of mine who probably less than 2 years since I first arrived in England, so that must have been 2011, I guess, maybe between 2010 and 11, John Richards, who I met here in England, he connected me with a guy who you know actually very well, our friend Keith.
Yep.
Who became my mentor. But just at that time, before he actually officially started mentoring me in any way, I mean, it wasn't official anyway, but we just used to meet. Just at the same time, he also said, my friend John also said, you should come and join this men's group. We meet every week here in Worthing by the sea, which is about an hour from where I'm here now, from Eastbourne, in the home of another giant on the masculine journey in my life, and mentor called Nigel Mohammed. So Nigel Mohammed will host these 5 or 6 men, and then they go over films, they watch films or chapters of book, and then talk about their own masculinity. And they were talking about the father wound one time when I was there, and I just felt out of place. Yeah. So one man's father was a very powerful church leader, and he totally ignored him and he shamed him because of religion. Another man's father was totally gone, and he was a fatherless man. He was running the street. He was a wild boy, street man, a street guy. Another man's father was just cold and distant and harsh, And I just sat there, I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Yeah. I mean, I like this man. Obviously, there's something spiritual and emotionally that I want to get out of this, but I'm not like them. Like, my father was good. My father he's a rock. He's still is, and he's still alive right now. But even then, about a decade ago, he was like even more in my mind. Yeah, I always wanted to be like my father. I mean, he was honest. He didn't go out drinking his money away, and he was strong. And that strength was what attracted me because I never had it. Right. And so I just remember mumbling something about that to Nigel when he was asking me, did that resonate? And I just said, well, I don't know. I mean, my father, he's all right. Yeah. I don't have this massive wound. I can't pinpoint anything that my father did. He didn't, And then I remember Nigel, he just like straight to the point saying, sooner or later, you're going to have to face your father wound, George. Yeah. He just said it. And then I remember part of me was feeling, well, I guess if you're saying that I have a wound, but there was another part of me. There's just 1% that I suddenly became sensitive to. And it was just a very little hint of grief from my body. It wasn't mental. It wasn't cerebral. It wasn't something that I could pinpoint, but it's something my body reacted. And this followed in the next year. In the next 6 months, everywhere I went in terms of meetings, in terms of to do with masculinity and the spiritual journey of man, I heard things about fathers not loving their children. And this hint of grief that I had inside of me would just go up a notch. And I just felt the other part of me, the logical part of me, was offended. I'm like, I have no right to be grieved. I've got a father. He still supports me to as much as, and yet there was a little boy inside of me saying, I was not loved. I was not loved. And so it happened in time. And then I started going to these healing retreats, and then the grief would come up. But then in the same time, now to answer your question in a more precise way, the first sort of archetypal in my journey story that was big, that was clean cut, because most stories are not. Most stories are just silent hints of rejection, silent hints of you're not good enough, unspoken even, an eye contact that was not made or made in the wrongful way. So that's just accumulation of wounds and neglect. But this one was quite severe, and that's the first thing that came up in my psyche when I started to come face to face with my father wound. It was when I was 15 years old, and I just started to go out in my village. Go out, meaning, I mean, there's this like a little nightclub. It was just an old communist concrete building, which was the restaurant for like decades. But then on Friday and Saturday night, the youngsters would take over, and they would have a DJ, and the person who owned it turned into a discotheque, they used to call it. So, and we live very close to the center, to the village center. And I would hear them Friday and Saturday night, and I just started to, be interested in music, and then I hear them, I hear the young people, and hear the loud bass of the music, and I wanted to be a part of that. But because I grew up with a very strong father, strong warrior type father, who would just, confront people if he didn't like something, even though he never beat me up, he never abused me in this way, because I was not loved in an intimate way, I shied away from all that healthy energy, healthy masculine boundary drawing warrior like energy that said, no, that's my space, you can't come. So I had none of that. And so in order to protect myself as a child, because we all gravitate towards things that would protect us, either intellectual knowledge or, well, as you know, we'll become something which is just one part of who we are, because we can't access these other parts. And I became just a joker, like the class clown.
Right. Right.
And I did all right for myself. Everyone liked me because of this. And I just wanted to have fun. Let's face it. You're young. You don't want to be, oh, why am I this way? Why am I not that way? You just cover your shame and you just go on to have fun. Sure. And I went to have fun that night. Probably the second or third night I came out. And I remember wearing a black T-shirt with the face of the frontman of The Prodigy. The Prodigy. I was really into The Prodigy from 1997. And this happened in 1999. Just feeling like a young man. Yes. But then there was another young man who is now dead, actually. He passed on from an overdose, which is very unusual from people from my village, because he came from town, but that's very broken, fatherless boy who came from town, and he was tough. Yeah. And even though physically he was smaller than me, he wasn't bigger, his toughness came through his eyes. It was nothing to do with how big and strong you are. It's to do whether you're a warrior or not. And I knew I was not a warrior like my father. So I would never confront anyone. But he came confronting me because he was a bully, unfortunately. And then because I didn't, fight. So there was no real fight. But he just ended up just giving me a black eye. And it was not about the black eye. It was about the shame, the humiliation. Yeah. And I remember just walking home and I'm thinking, I realized I've got this thing on my face that's swollen, and I was praying that my father wouldn't be awake. But hot summer, all the windows open, football games, all like that. So my father was awake, and I came in and I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm an amateur in these things. I'm not streetwise like my dad. So as soon as I walked through the door, I started taking my T-shirt off, and my dad just detected something wrong about that. He said, "Hey, what's with that? Yeah. Is there anything wrong with your face? Why did you cover your face so quickly?" I said, I don't know. And then the shame started to really, it's interesting. You come at home and you're supposed to let your guard down. But when you grow up with people who have emotional boundaries, especially with my dad, like he couldn't help it. That's how he was. He grew up in a very, very tough environment, far different from mine. So I started feeling even more unsafe, just as if I'm facing that bully again, another cold side of masculinity. And I just mumbled something, and he said, "Who hit you?" And I say, "Oh, it's so-and-so." And now my dad, he had a dilemma, I guess, and he wanted to pump me up. He wanted to encourage me so that I don't become the pushover that maybe deep down he fears that I would become. And I told him who he was, and he said, "Oh, I know this guy. You need to get this guy." And there was also another guy involved, to be fair, later. And so he said, get these guys. Otherwise, they'll just be messing with you. You become a pushover. Get them one by one. Tomorrow, after tomorrow, give it some time, but you must. And you must beat them up. Good. You must do it. So that's how he wouldn't even think about doing this again, which I'm not disputing at all. I'm not saying this was wrong, what he told me. Right. It's just that we didn't have a connection at all. He didn't know how much shame and fear I already had. And he just dumped some more shame and fear. And then when he saw how dejected I was, I just remember looking down and feeling, I'm not like that. Who does he expect me to be? I'm not like him. Does he not see? Right. I'll never be a man, I'm not like him. I'm not even a real boy. So there was this thing about my own inner masculine makeup. this doubt. And then he just saw the doubt and the fear and the shame in it. And he just said, almost as if to himself, say, don't worry about it. You're not made for this. And as soon as he said that, then all the swelling of the doubt and fear and shame just burst into an explosion in my mind. And then I knew that I'll never be a man. I would never be a man.
Right.
And of course, now people tell you, but you don't need to be able to fight to be a man. But I know what a little boy wants. The little boy doesn't just want to be a dreamer and a poet, which I kind of became, but he also wants to be a warrior. And
right.
I can't compromise with my inner makeup. I knew what I wanted to be. I just was not allowed to get there because my father was very cold. And so I just remember just this, like a bomb going off, and almost like in the films when there's this silence, you see people's lips are moving, but you don't hear them anymore because of the you being shell shocked. And I just remember just looking around, and suddenly, like everything in this house that I was born in, and I pursued life in, and I enjoyed life in, it became colder, like a degree grayer, and it's like I don't even belong here anymore.
Wow.
I don't even belong in this world anymore. It's like something, part of me really split from that little boy, where all the joy and all the goodness is in the little boy. And there was another part of me who said, you know what? That's it. I wish you die, little boy. You little worm. I wish you just dead. I hate you. And you know what? If there was any way for me to continue without you, I would. If I could just kill you, if I could just pull you out of myself and put a bullet to your head and then move on, I would. And in a way, I did. Because the very next day, I started lifting weights. And after 5 years, I became, physically at least, a very different person. So yeah, to answer your question, that's one of the events that really surfaced.
Wow. And thank you for the honesty of that story, because I kind of wanted, I wanted to kind of parse apart just the title of the book, The Father Wound. And for anyone who views this or listens to this on my platform or George's, if you're a man or if you're a woman who loves her man, go and get this book, go and read this book. And thank you for the honor of getting to see it before it was published. And it was just fascinating. We've talked about this in one of your previous video podcasts called Roots and Story, and we'll link that for the viewers and listeners. But my father wound came from a totally opposite story. So you talked about discovering your father wound here. Talk a little bit now for the viewers and listeners, George, about your journey from that story that you just shared, about that flashpoint, I'll call it, in your own masculine journey with your father, recognizing both his fathering and the fatherless young boy you just beautifully described. He had a father. You have a father, but you were painfully aware from your story you just shared about that separation with the little boy. So talk a little bit in terms of maybe fast forwarding from that story. How did you learn to address the father wound? What is maybe a story about where that coalesced in your own journey as a man? How did you learn to address it? Like I shared in Roots and Story with you, my involvement with the Mankind Project decades ago, where it actually happened in 1996 after my father died. And I went through an initiatory journey with Mankind Project where I first started to learn about that wound. So how did you first, as a man, start to address the father wound in your own heart and story?
Well, I was very lucky, actually. And there's something that is a quote by Jesus who said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And I see what he means. Every day I can see why. Because even though I was cut off from that little boy and I was cut off from my wound, even though when men spoke to me about the wound, I was like, what wound? Yeah. There was a little hint of grief in my body. Okay. And this is what I count my luck. This is what I count my being blessed to be poor in spirit, because my journey started of just me locating more of those emotions, as people were talking about father and watching films when the father and son, like Gladiator, for example, when, he talks, Commodore says, what is it in me that you hate so much? And the father didn't hate him, but that was my story. The father just didn't have time for him. The father was just cold and he expected him to have these virtues. And the little boy just said, you hate me. And so watching things like that, I'll just start crying. And then I had the grace to allow that little boy to go in the bedroom and just cry instead of saying, no, be a man, because that didn't work for me.
Yep.
I've tried that. But I must say, if this is whoever's watching, listening, if this is not your story, is because that little boy maybe is even further away, or maybe you put a shield between the expression and the little boy. And so I did to a degree too. It just, I never, I guess, quite succeeded. So I was able to access that grief a little bit. And then that was my way in, the emotions. But there comes a time when you don't, when it's all just mental knowledge. And then you need to find that little boy. And that's a process in itself. In fact, my second book, and they're small books. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like these huge volumes that I'm producing, but my second little book, it's about that little boy, actually, because there's a process through which you can find that little boy and then discover the emotions within him. Because if the man doesn't have the emotion, he just goes about his business saying, well, I've been listening about the father wound, but guys, nothing touches me. I don't feel even anything. So I just move on. Well, no, you don't. You look for that little boy because he's been touched. It's just that the way you moved on from him, it was so that you can put a wall between you and him. And so, yeah, these two both. First, two emotions, and second, I had to go and find a little boy.
Yeah, you have to. And again, I'm not going to give any spoilers away to the Mankind Project's New Warrior Training Adventure, their experiential initiatory journey, but a core part of it is called The Little Boy's Deepest Need. And until a man, me, in my adventure in 96, actually went inside to that little boy and discovered, like we were talking about in the first part of the discussion, discovered what his need was, I wasn't going to make any progress in my journey as a man. None. And it's fascinating that you're talking about that little boy, and that's going to be your next journey in this greater work, to talk about the little boy who is inside the man. I mean, he's still inside you. He's still inside me.
Yeah.
Just last night at work, I had a wonderfully disruptive and kind of offensive exchange with a male customer who was at the airport renting a car. And this man got so angry, so abusive at me because of certain details of the exchange that weren't in his favor, I'll say. And as he's spewing his hate on me, I'm 59, I'll turn 60 in July. Something in me became 6 years old. And I'm standing there, 6'5", 260 pounds. I could have easily projected violence, physicality onto this man to control what the anger and the fear was inside of me. It was this little boy saying, I don't want to get fucking beat up anymore. Stop beating me up internally. That's the little boy's voice in me. And I'm standing there as a man. And so I think, George, you're spot on in talking about the little boy, because I believe this is just for me. I believe it's true for you too. There's always more work to be done on behalf of that little boy. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yes. And I find that the degree to which we're able to feel emotions, uncomfortable emotions like that, and like grief, probably shows how close we are to that little boy. And that was my journey, at least. There is a season, there's a time and space where what's in your body from that little boy needs to come out. People don't realize that. You can't move on from the little boy. He's inside of you. Trouble is with me, when the little boy inside of me I'll feel stop beating me, it's not towards the external world, it's towards me. Right. It's like the little boy was feeling from the older me that I'm beating him because that's what I did. I controlled myself. I lifted weights and I became a perfectionist. So I'll go into a meeting and then, excuse me. And then after the meeting that I go into, I'll drive home, replaying the meeting in my head and just, oh, George, why did you say that? That was stupid. So, and that little boy is saying, stop it. I'm doing my best. What do you want? And I mean, if we do to a child what 1/10 of the abuse that we do to ourselves, we'll be in prison for life. Yeah. If we get a real external child, I shouldn't say real, but a child outside of us, and we abuse that child as much even 1/10 of how much we abuse ourselves, that's a crime. We crush this child.
Yeah.
And yet we're doing it to ourselves all the time.
Right. No, beautiful. Because again, in reflection of last night for me was that, so as I was standing there feeling like I was 6 years old, and the man across the counter really was the manifestation of my father, like I shared in Roots and Stories. That was a very abusive childhood for me, abusing from the father to me as the little boy. And I carried that all through my life. I didn't realize it until I dissected the story last night and early this morning, was that none of my coworkers came to my rescue while I was getting abused by this customer. So again, the little boy in me was just reliving trauma that was real, being abused by the father, and no one in the family would come in to intervene. So it was natural for that little boy in me, that wounded part of the little boy in me, to just stand there and take that shit last night and realize, oh, this is just how it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's that part you were talking about, the little boy, that the mature, healthy, masculine man that I've worked on and have become, and still becoming, the work that you do that we're going to talk about here in a little while, was like, it's okay, I'm here, I've got you, you're safe, this man cannot hurt you. And to the betterment of mankind, I think I got to choose in a flash of a moment to say to that little boy, you don't have to hurt him either. Because what that little boy wanted to do was really inflict damage on that man, i.e. his father, my father.
Yes.
But the healthy masculinity that you work at and coach men in and talk about and blog about and write about, I think, is it fair to say that that's part of your story too, about how you've learned to address the father wound?
Yes, yeah. But it's fascinating how me and you click. It's very, very interesting. We have a very interesting connection because, as we know, we have a true self and we have a false self, and the false self is made up by genuine components of masculinity, which we have. But we just a few. So you growing up in the Bronx, you became the warrior. So your go-to was like, to stay safe, I'm gonna hurt. Yep. Where me, I guess I had a chance to do that, or I don't know why, but I became the opposite. And so when the little boy inside of me comes up, it's interesting how in our healed versions, or more healed now, we both choose the same thing. It's okay, I'm protecting the little boy, but also I don't need to become violent with this man, because that's not protecting the little boy either, unless he comes, defending my own self. But then in my brokenness, I would have been the total opposite. I would have been like, the little boy in me would feel shame and feel, oh no. Yeah. And then the older me would say, you coward. Why do I feel that? You coward. How could you be that? Look, you're a big man now. You're afraid of this man shouting. What's wrong with you? So I would have just turned it inwardly. Yeah. And that's the reason why they call depression, depressing things.
Yes.
And I never had that. But it's interesting how, even though we both became different, we're becoming somebody that's very, very, that have everything, that has all the component of masculinity. Yes, I'm able to fight for myself physically if I have to, but I'm choosing not to, because that's good.
Right.
That's good.
No, absolutely. So, that's a corner we can turn right now about healthy masculinity, because that portion of the healthy masculine and being a man in our own hearts and our stories, I'm not making up the story for you, but I have to assume that was a key part for you in launching Men's Corner, your training for men, what you do on mission and point in the world. So speak a little bit about the background for Men's Corner, because I think, I don't think I'm wrong, but correct me if I am, if that has manifested itself over time in the part of how you've learned to overcome those hidden phenomena that shape every man's life. So talk to our viewers and listeners about Men's Corner, how that came about in your story.
Yes, no, you got it right. That's perfect to the point. Men's Corner is kind of like a reflection, or at least the beginnings of a reflection of how I grew up into fullness of what I know now in terms of healing in terms of who I am, not just healing, but becoming something. Because, it's easy to talk about healing as if we're some, like the addicts, right? I'm an addict. No. You have to move on.
Yes.
It's a good start, but you don't want to stay there. We're not just men. Men's work, very often in the world, men's work is clinical experience, like a bunch of men sitting in a circle. That's a good start. You need to open your heart. You need to open your body for the trauma to come out. But eventually you need to become more. You need to start retraining yourself for the life that you always wanted to live.
Yes.
So the redemption, for me, my most favorite word is probably redemption. Yes, Men's Corner, I wanted to create something like a place, a physical place or virtual place, like a space for men where, because my journey my freedom as a man didn't just come from one channel. It didn't just come from that men's group that I used to attend or from my mentors. No, it came through many, many different things. And they include the emotions, they include the spiritual, they include the physical as well, like the physical, engaging the body. So I'm like, where is that thing? Like, where is that source that puts them into one? I want something like that. And then I looked around and I'm like, whoa, maybe the reason why I long that is because it's in me. And I'm not saying I'm this unique, original man, but we all are in our own different ways. So I want to create something that reflects the freedom that I've known, because I started before Men's Corner event. I was working with men one-to-one, and I started seeing victories. I started seeing freedom, and I'm like, okay, wow. So I want more. I want just a broader thing when I can put all these things together. So Men's Corner is the beginnings of something like that. It's not there yet, of all aspects of what I've known to work in the masculine soul, and also sharing my own personal journey.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah. And I encourage anyone watching this, listening to it, to go discover George's site, because I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a few years now. And it was a spiritual divine appointment that brought us together in our masculine journey, in our spiritual journey. And my life is better because of your presence in it. And you told me that vice versa. George and I right now are encouraging each other in our writings. And I wanted to just put a shout out to you and others who are seeing this or hearing it. Go to George's site to read his story, because George, you're very honest and transparent in your blogs on there, how you share your story, I call it the fierce and brutal honesty of the heart. And it's disruptive. One of the things I love about you that I feel connected to is just that passion of the written word, and just being brutally, disruptively honest with your story. No apologies. You don't sugarcoat it. You just tell it in a way that for me, because I'm the reader of it, I can't speak for anybody else who reads your works, but man, when I first started reading your works, I'm like, ouch, man, there's my story. There's another man who knows my story, because you're talking about some things that are really disruptive in the masculine journey. I remember when I first led a small group of men through John Eldridge's Wild at Heart back in 2009. He's got a chapter on the father wound, and it's juxtaposed right next to a chapter what he calls the poser, that brilliant disguise that every man has. And it was like 8 men total in the group, and 4 of us there was a father and a son in the group, and then another friend of mine from Mankind Project was in the group, and then I had 4 men from my local church. Not downing church whatsoever, but it was almost like those 4 men from the church, once we got to those chapters of the poser and the father wound, boy, I mean, the poser actually came out in them, because they didn't want to talk about the father wound, where me and my friend and the father and son were all in to dive into that shit. But it's, I highly encourage anybody new to you, new to your site, to dive into your blogs. And so talk about what you love about writing in telling the story of your masculine journey, because you just put this book out. You've got bigger plans and more to come. So talk about the power of the story, specifically you as a writer, and how you find both healing and power in sharing that with other men.
Well, first, thank you for the really kind words, John. And that goes back to you absolutely in that there is nothing that I desire more that will come out of this relationship between me and you than to see you, in the years to come as a widely published, read, and celebrated author, because you have this gift and to me, when I read not that long ago the first chapter of your memoirs, which to me, I mean, what a great story, because you see this, you have the eyes to see the story, and so just reading that, it just took me there. It just took me there. But again, because I relate, the little boy inside of me relate to my own story. So I mean, we couldn't be more different. Your first 9 years in the Bronx, and my first years in the village in the rural Bulgaria, we couldn't be more. And yet we're so much like we're clicking. I just reading your story, I'm like, wow, that really speaks to me in a good way. In a very, very, very good way. And so yes, thank you, and same to you, absolutely. About writing, what I find, well, I mean, first, it's not something that I can recommend to people. Oh, you should try writing. I recommend it to somebody who I see might have the gift, because it's not fair to just try and recommend things that people might not be into or not supposed to be into. However, I encourage everyone to discover if there's a little hint of passion. Oh, I've always liked writing. Oh, I've always liked speaking. Go for it. See what's there for you. Oh, but I'm not good. But of course you're not good if you've never explored it. I mean, explore it for 10 years, then we'll see how good you are. Then you can judge yourself. So it's funny, writing was I always thought I was not a talented guy growing up, just watching boys who could play sports or play the piano, play anything, do anything. I was like, oh, they have talent. Well, I don't ain't any. The only thing, if you'd ask me, maybe in my teenage years, say, is there anything that you can do that you're good at? I'd be like, I guess I'm okay. I mean, I read a lot, but that's not really a skill. Is it a skill? No. Well, I can write. I sort of write. And so that's the only thing that I thought maybe there's something there. So I never quite lost that, even though I lost so many things. I wouldn't say I lost, but I missed out because I didn't develop so many things, which now I'm trying to get back into. Reading and writing has been with me, and I've been reading books since I was 4 or 5 years old. So there's something about writing that I find amazing. First, it's a release when you get it out, as you know, because it's painful. It's painful to have this unexpressed thing inside of you. People think like writers live this glamorous life, and there's a reason why they're so troubled.
I see the Hemingway book behind you on the bookshelf, so a shout out to Mr. Hemingway there. He didn't lead a quiet life, and he was troubled. Yeah. So
Hemingway said, "There is nothing to writing. All you have to do is sit behind the typewriter and bleed."
Yeah, there you go. Bingo, right there. Yep.
So the pain of having something in you that you can't put words to, but the words seem to manifest as you type them out. And what's really merciful about writing is that you can look at the sentence and say, actually, in transmitting this story, I didn't just feel this, and this. There was also a hint of this. Okay, let me put this in. So you can fully picture a story of how you felt something, or through somebody else's eyes, whatever. You can fully picture it because it gives you that opportunity. If you make a video, if you film it, you might watch it and say, no, that's not quite the same. But writing, you can enrich it according to how you feel. No, there was also this emotion. Okay, let me put that in as well. So you can describe it so like you're doing so wonderfully well, so that, and you can tell when somebody's done it well because you read it and you see the pictures in your mind through your own eyes, through your own interpretation. It's like, yes, I feel that, I see that. And so to me, that's writing is just powerful. It's just powerful.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words in return. And it's, again, testimony to the healing of the masculine journey. I want to turn another corner that you and I see that gift in each other, encourage it in each other as men, champion it in our private journeys, because there is a cathartic point of just using writing as the example where it does lead to overcoming. And I want to take that third part of the subtitle and talk about that, because You know, obviously, George, you have a life coaching business. Your designation within that, I believe, is to show men how to empower themselves, to support them, to step into that confidence, to realize, like you said, that potential of who they are, who they can become, who they're becoming, both the masculine and the spiritual design in them. So speak a little bit about what the whole picture so far in your journey as a man is towards that overcoming part of the subtitle of the father wound. How does a man learn to overcome those limitations? How does a man learn to overcome the wounding of the little boy? And how do you see that manifesting through Men's Corner, through your life coaching? How do you see that overcoming? What does it offer a man who might be listening, watching, who might pick up Father Wound and read it and think, oh shit, now what do I do? How do I overcome? Because I know in the book you did it brilliantly. You offer some really focused questions for a man to kind of go through and look at and kind of actually start digging into that soil. So speak about overcoming a little bit.
Yes, well, overcoming, that's the real deal. I mean, you can do all the work on yourself in darkness, and I did for 10 years.
Me too. Yep.
But then it's not real unless. Now, so just to go into the mechanics a little bit, it looks like that. There's a little boy inside of you who is wounded.
Right.
And the beginning of the journey, you're not aware of that little boy, largely. You're just aware of some feelings coming maybe here and there, but largely you're doing well. And then you have to become aware, understand that, that's what wounded the little boy, and then address the wounds. But then now the question that you're asking is, finally, as the little boy has come into some healing and reintegration with you, with the external life through the grown man. And these are not just emotional and spiritual and psychic concepts. They're true. I mean, every therapist worth their salt will tell you. There was this quote saying, we are every age we've ever been. That's why you see grown men, like the man who shouted at you yesterday, just take it out of proportion. Yeah. That's what you see. I mean, it's crazy, but it's not crazy at all when you understand it. We all do it. Sometimes we're 5 years old, and that's not bad. That just is. And so taking that little boy closer and closer to the reality, healing, forgiveness between you and the little boy, then between you and the father. Mm-hmm. But then there needs to be a time, unless that time comes, you'll just be work in progress forever. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to start living because that's what it's all about. It's about life. No little boy wants to spend his life in a clinic, I just can't wait to go and be healed for the rest of my life and just try and be a better man. No. Little boy wants to live. Look at him. In his eyes, there's fire. I mean, he wants to be heroic. He wants to experiment. He wants to move his body. That's very important. He wants to defend the goodness, and he wants to move towards goodness. He wants to love. And so the overcoming comes to when that little boy is ready. And of course, it doesn't come in one event. There are steps. When that little boy is ready inside the man, he needs to be taken through what used to be called initiation, masculine initiation. And in some tribal communities, they have it. But today, how it comes to us is in ways in which the little boy has been prevented from entering. For example, one example, it could be, like in my case, to be physical, to be a physical warrior, to be among other men, to join a boxing class or to wrestle or something. Oh my goodness, like the touch of another man on my skin, I would just freeze. Even when I was huge, I had muscles and I was working in the security doorman, somebody would come and another friend would just lean on me and I would just freeze. I'm like, another man touching me now. And so, yeah, I've not been in that world. So I retreat from that. And so I had to take that little boy on a journey. And in fact, that journey, there's another part of my journey is actually I'm facing right now, which is even deeper. But I have been successfully. So one thing, how it looked to me is, I took the little boy out of the trauma from fear and I joined the boxing gym.
Okay.
But again, you don't want to just join a boxing gym in order to be a of man, because then you just abuse the little boy more.
Right, that's the caricature, right?
That would be Hemingway.
Yeah.
You don't want to be another Hemingway. Look how he ended up. It obviously didn't work for him, the macho image.
Right.
Another thing is I joined a swimming pool, local swimming pool, because I couldn't swim. I had terror, I had fear. It came from my father. I could just freeze. I was freezing in the water. So I moved, in a nutshell, move towards your fears. But again, I don't want to just I advise every man who listen to this, don't just listen to this last bit. I'm almost like reluctant to tell you what I've done in order to take my little boy out on the journey into the world, because other people look at it and say, oh, I just need to do that, like Hemingway would do. Oh, I just need to join a boxing gym, or I just need to learn to swim. No. You don't know how it looks like to you. You need the first 2 chapters. Don't go into the last chapter. This is what men do. They just look for quick solutions.
Sure.
Because deep down, we're meant to find solutions. But no, don't take that and just say, wow, I just need to do what George did. No, not at all. But to define this is take that little boy out. In a nutshell, to define this in so many words, take the little boy out, because he's been in for a long time and he needed to be in to receive the healing and mercy and the reintegration. But now it's in the last chapter, it's time to start living. So I would ask that little boy, what is it that you couldn't do but always wanted to do?
Right.
I would ask that of the men, because the men will say, oh no, I never was into swimming, or I never was into boxing, I never was into wrestling. I'm not asking you.
No,
I'm asking the little boy. You shut up.
Shut up. I'm asking him. Right.
You need to step down so that he can come up. And I've seen the most extraordinary thing in lives of other men who are, much older than me and much more surprised than me when something in them surfaces. Well, that's not like me. I never had any desire. And suddenly I feel the desire to do that.
Right.
Somebody, obviously, I'm not going to mention names, but somebody who take this journey successfully and is working through the last chapter with such fierce abandon that it just fills me with joy. He was a boy who was never was good with his hands, a bit like me, never done any manual work. And so as soon as, and we're talking about much older man, so nobody has an excuse. So, but, after a very interesting experience between him and his long dead father, funny enough, the father wound again, and the healing of the father wound, he said that something interesting happened. Where previously he said, if something broke in the house, the first thing that will pop in my body will be like irritation and anger. I don't want to be trying fixing things or getting people to fix. And just because the broken thing exposed something that maybe he felt inadequate. And again, it's easy to say, oh, well, you shouldn't be like that. Who said that men should fix things? I'm not saying anything, but the fact that he felt strongly about that shows you that maybe there was something that he knew was his place to play, his part to play, and he wasn't. So the vacuum was filled with these bad emotions towards it. I mean, if you react strongly against something, chances are there's something that you're reacting strongly against. If it doesn't touch you, then that's fine. And he's every time something would break, I'd be like, oh. And so one morning, he just woke up and he saw the bedroom clock had stopped working. And he said, and I was expecting that irritation. Oh. Instead, what came up in his heart, in his body, was like, I wonder if I can open this to see what happened, to see if I can fix it.
The curiosity of the boy.
Wow.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a man who spends decades, I'm talking tens of decades without having that. And suddenly now he's become that boy. And the boy now has a fulfillment into the masculine world, and he can engage things, he can do things, he can learn again. So again, the last chapter is not just exposing the boy to the elements and letting him fail, but take him into a process of learning the things that he always wanted to learn.
Yeah, and that's just a beautiful picture, because I've shared this story with you, and I'm thinking about just the reintroduction of drumming into my own story as a man over the last year, and actually giving that little boy the checkbook, so to speak, last April to say, go ahead and buy the electronic drum set, because I live in a small apartment, so that was the reality. But the joy of him, like, go get the Christmas present you really want. Go get the drums that you really want and play again after decades of not having that joy. And you're perfectly describing it, because the joy of that little boy in that just small part of my story, healed and given permission to play and have fun and be a boy, has empowered me to be a better man over the last year, has shaped me in being a better man. over this last year. And that's just one small part of overcoming, you know,
Yeah.
overcoming the, what I
Home.
thought was, yeah, the shame of me not ever having enough money or not being worth making the purchase or not believing in, and I've never taken drum lessons. I've always had just a gift to do it, but I ignored it for decades. And then just to give that little boy the permission to be the little boy. I just can't, and I play a few minutes every day maybe, but it's those few minutes of tapping into boyhood again, and for the first time, that I think you're speaking about so eloquently. So, well, life coaching is part of what you do with Training for Men and Men's Work. Is that a challenge to guide and mentor men? Because I think fatherlessness and the lack of men seeking mentorship are tied together. So is it a challenge as a life coach in what you do to seek to empower men? Like you said, you're not giving them your story and saying, follow my lead. You're sharing your experiences with them. So is that a challenge that you see as a life coach to guide and mentor men who may be through the father wound and also a parallel track of fatherless, because there's a lot of fatherless in our world. I mean, it's real. It happens partly from the father wound and partly from men not stepping up into a healthy masculinity. So do you see a challenge in coaching men towards guidance and mentorship? Because it really is part of that missing piece. You talked about initiation in cultures. Healthy masculine initiation is missing across the globe. So where do you see also the value of you and life coaching towards guiding and shepherding men towards mentorship? Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, well, there is a challenge, and I find that the biggest challenge actually is to get men to leave the familiar of their own mindset. It's very interesting how men can come to me and say that they want more and mean it,
right?
But it's very difficult to make them see, well, the fact that you want more means that you have to leave behind what you already know.
Yeah.
Discard it, not to say it's not true, but it's not enough. Right. What you know has worked for you so far. And so, last week only, I was talking to this young man and I was talking to him a little bit about now it's time to start entering a little bit of that training of start saying no to people because you never had that. And just start, explaining to, and he said, well, I've been taught never to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that's the problem. Because if what you've been taught has worked so far, then you would have needed this. You would have not needed this. So I'm not just saying you should discard everything that you know and who you are, but the challenge is between me and those men for the first initial sessions that we have. It's like, you need to understand this is a totally new thing. This is deeper. So drop everything. This will not be taken away from you. You still pick it up, your knowledge and what you know about this and that. You still pick it up, but now you need to become like a child. Drop it and enter in. There is I forgot, there was this quote, might have been from Alice in Wonderland or something like that, or something from George MacDonald. But I remember very clearly, you need to jump in. There's no other way. Jump into that hole. Jump in that hole. There's no other way. If you want more, you need to risk. So that's a challenge. It's a challenge to get men to take risks. And that's why I find it very useful to work with men. It's very easy who are have already reached some form of, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of depression, or I've had enough of not being able to say no to people, or I've had enough of not being able to step up. So that's a good point to get a man on the journey, because if he's comfortable, it's difficult to. Who wants to be uncomfortable?
No, absolutely. You talk about trust. I mean, again, not giving away too many spoilers, but I've seen this time and time again in the experiential men's work I've done with Mankind Project and in their experiential weekend, where a man will be set up to do what's called a trust fall, where he's brought up blindfolded onto this ladder, very high up off the ground, a platform, and there's safety around him, men guiding him up. But the purpose of it is to take away his vision. Okay, so he doesn't see like the physical outside world. So it brings him inside visually if he's got the blindfold on, and he's shepherded up safely up to this top of this ladder. What he doesn't know is behind him, there are a phalanx on either side of 6 to 8 men, arms interlocked, waiting to catch him. But he doesn't know this. He's just got to trust the man at his side, the guide, the life coach that you're describing.
Yeah.
And he's brought up kind of through a little guided meditation up the stairs of the ladder, which might be the steps that represent what's blocking him, like you were talking about, what he's got to leave behind, the comfortable, the familiar. So he gets to the top of the ladder, and the question is really simple. You know, do you want to stay in the safe and the familiar, or do you want to fall into the unknown and change everything about what you truly say you want to change? So that's where the shit is. That's where the action is. Okay, do I trust that when I fall, I'm going to be caught somehow, some way, by man, by spirituality, by God, by something? And it's just and you know, the first time I did that process, I was scared shitless. Okay?
Wow.
Right, because I knew I was going up something.
So how many times did you actually do it?
I've done a trust fall at least a half dozen times in my life, and the first one's always, and to be fair, every time, even after experiencing the first one, knowing what I know, and you know, if it's a spoiler, it's a spoiler, but until you've done it, you will never understand what I'm talking about. But yeah, every time I've done it, that sense of, okay, you're saying it correctly, George, I have to leave the familiar behind to overcome. Okay, we talked honestly about addictions in my story, lust in my story. Some have been healed greatly, some are a work in progress, but unless I'm willing to overcome, unless I'm willing, you're willing, another man is willing to leave the familiar, then it's the same old story. It's the same old map getting me lost in the same circles. And so the trust fall, I think, is designed, for me at least, to say, hey, I'm going to leave what I know behind and trust that I'm going to fall into something greater. And I think your analogy, I think it might be linked to Alice in Wonderland, falling down the rabbit hole, tumbling down the rabbit hole, you know, to a different reality, you know, and that's why, you know, we talked about film and story in another podcast. I mean, the mythologies offline before we started this morning, I showed you a film clip, a film trailer of a film coming out next year, just about the mythology of a masculine journey and the battle that comes against a man's heart and story. So fascinating stuff. So, I mean, what would you say in wrapping this up today about what do you want a man to gain from reading The Father Wound? What if you could have an impact or a wish for a man who picks this up and reads it? And again, it's available as an ebook, correct, on Amazon, both in US and UK. What's one wish that you have for a man who's reading this?
My bravest dream about, you know, and for any man who reads this is not just to become aware of a wound, not just to become aware of how much he's been shaped, not even just to heal it, but to become the man he was always meant to be, ever since he was a little boy. That's my wish in a nutshell. And to elaborate on that, it would be like, the Father Wound has shaped us so much from the womb, even from our first entry into the world, then the Father Wound. What's missing and what's given, what's not given, that shapes us. But what if this hasn't happened? What if there had been no wound, right? That boy would have been somebody great. That boy would have been someone, wow, who has the full aspect of masculinity. And that's what we don't see. That's what we've never seen in the world. That's why as soon as there is a man like that, he goes to achieve great things, because he's got, not only is he tender and loving, but also he's got this warrior capacity. Not only is he gifted, but also he's gifted in this and he's gifted in that. It's very often you see people who are gifted in many capacities, then things happen to them, relationships, people treat them in better ways. Oh, why? Oh, because of his inner makeup. He's able to reach out and be tender. He's able to fight and protect his boundaries. He's able. So, and we look at them, we who are the ordinary ones, we say, well, I'm not like that. Well, you are somebody greater.
Yeah.
Because the fact that you see an aspect of masculinity that's appealing to you, at least you did when you were a boy, it means that you have it within yourselves.
Right. So
that you can develop it. Otherwise, you wouldn't desire it. But now, grown men would watch that and say, well, I don't desire it. Well, again, I'm not asking you. I'm asking the little boy.
Yeah.
And if you go back to your story, you see. So my hope and my prayer, my wish for everyone who just not only reads the book, but goes through the journey of the healing of the father wound, is to keep going until you become somebody who is no longer shaped by the father wound, so that you can even start reaping the blessings of what your father was meant to give you. Because that goes on to another book in the future. But these blessings that were meant to be imparted to you by your father, they're in your body. They're waiting to be released.
Yeah.
But unless you deal with the father wound, that won't happen.
No.
So my prayer for everyone who goes through the book and goes through the wound is to actually go through, not get stuck there, or not be, even worse, being afraid to enter it, but actually to follow that journey to its healing end, where you're restored and redeemed into who you were always meant to be.
Yeah, well said. And I have a saying, I don't know where I got it, but it's been with me for quite a long time. The only way out is through.
Yes.
The only way out is through. And again, I'm better today having men like you in my journey, in my story, in my life coaches, friends, allies, a brother in arms. And this is what I encourage anyone, any man seeing this, hearing it, linking to it through your site, my site, however they find it, just keep going. Okay, it's not easy, it's not quick, it's not cheap, as our friend Morgan Snyder says on the masculine journey. Becoming the man who we're meant to be requires work, it requires effort, it requires a cost. There's a cost to be paid.
Yes.
And so I bless you, George, for having the courage and the fierce honesty to put this work out in this time, in this place for men to discover. I'm excited to hear you talk about that more will be coming, especially about the little boy, because frankly, I'm sure there's other books out there about that, but personally, I need to read more of what you have to say. So I encourage others to just keep linking into your site to read more. We'll have links on this when it comes out in production to Men's Corner. And so thank you for your time today. Thank you for the courage to speak into men's hearts and stories, and keep going through. The only way out is through. So I'm with you on the journey of through. So thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for having me, my friend. Honestly, it's always, time just flies by. And as we know, as we have done in the past, we can spend a whole evening, whole morning, just getting deeper and deeper, because that's worth it. That's good. So thank you for providing the space and the time.
You're welcome. And here's the deal. I'm sure I'll be invited back to Men's Corner to do more video podcasts, as well as we're going to have some more of these, because George is right. Him and we have spoken for hours, and you can link to those through Men's Corner and Maximus Heart platforms to see Roots and Story and Film and Story. And I look forward to them more. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, John. Bless you.
Bless you.